Durham's Nothing But Truth.
Well, yes, the sweat is pouring, but it's a good sweat. It's not that nasal infection sweat fever. Feeling a lot better, folks. About 85%. And I got to give it up to my team, who's done a great job dealing with me during this. And, of course, our wonderful guests as well as you all taking the time to listen right here on AFR Talk, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. Hey, go to the Facebook page, like the page, start interacting, and you'll get hookups to the likes of Pete Sepp. He is the National Taxpayers Union Executive Vice President, regular guest here on Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, and we're proud to have him. Pete, thank you for taking the time. How are you tonight?
Doing okay. Glad to hear you're on the mend.
Thank you very much. John Harwood, CNBC Chief Washington correspondent, sat down with the Treasury Secretary, Jack Lew, and it seems that in this back and forth, we have a lot to learn. We're about to be hit with a lot of front page headlines in the next month or two dealing with budget resolutions, debt ceilings, and, well, defunding Obamacare, which is a part of the process, obviously. Here is John Harwood's question to Jack Lew. The speaker said his staff reiterated yesterday we need dollar-for-dollar spending cuts in return for a raise in the debt limit. Some conservatives have talked about linking defunding to the defunding of the Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, to a rise in the debt limit. What will happen to those ideas? And Jack Lew had this to say. Roll it.
John, the president's been very clear. We are not going to be negotiating over the debt limit.
Both of those are total non-starters?
Congress has already authorized funding, committed us to make expenditures. We're now in the place where the only question is, will we pay the bills that the United States has incurred? And it is just the only way to do that is for Congress to act, for it to act quickly. You know, what we need in our economy is some certainty. We don't need another self-inflicted wound. We don't need another crisis at the last minute. Congress should come back, and they should act.
Is a clean debt limit with nothing attached to it the only kind the president will accept?
Yeah, I'm just going to have to reiterate, John, the president's made clear he's not going to be negotiating over the debt limit. Congress has to act to pass the debt limit. Since 1789, every Congress has acted to pay the bills of the United States. This Congress needs to do the same.
My question to you is, in explaining first the debt limit, explain what it is. He made a comment that we won't be able to pay our bills without raising it. Those two questions, if that's true. So if you could define the debt limit and tell us if what he said about not raising it, that we would not be able to pay our bills, and specifically address Social Security and the like, if you wouldn't mind, Pete.
Well, these are all very clever answers to the questions. You have to listen carefully. He didn't say, no, the president wouldn't ever negotiate at all. He said the president's position is that this should not be negotiable. He has not necessarily ruled out a deal at the last minute. This is a very important thing. The debt ceiling is the statutory limit at which the federal government can borrow. Once it hits that limit, it is not authorized to borrow more. That is different from saying that the federal government can't pay its bills. What it says is that the federal government can't pay all of its future bills. It will have to spend less to stay within the debt limit. That would mean some very difficult choices, given the fact that the federal deficit is very high already. Would there be enough money from existing federal revenues to service the national debt, to pay Social Security benefits, and to pay out Medicare benefits? Within existing revenues, yes, but there wouldn't be much more left over for other functions of government. That would be a major problem, but it does not necessarily signal a default of the federal government. Again, it would send bad messages to investors, but that is not the definition of default.
And what you said opened up, listen specifically to what he had to say in his answer. What a great point. because here I'm focusing on just the two things, and you're saying, wait a second, no, you got to look at the negotiation. And interestingly enough, when we talk about negotiation, you addressed the tactic that is the message we will hear is Social Security is not going to get it out. You are not going to get your check. And that was used, and the only president ever to do this was President Obama. He did it twice in the last time in 2011. So your thoughts? We will be getting that message. And the idea is if the Republicans are not going to do it, they're going to be to blame for you not getting your check.
Yes, we're going to get that propaganda. And it's important to remember that all Treasury secretaries have used this kind of rhetoric, if not the Social Security card. Many of them, Republican and Democratic administrations, have said Congress shouldn't mess around with the debt ceiling. It's sending the wrong message to investors around the world. The Treasury Secretary is claiming that Congress has never taken us to such a brink as it did in 2011, risking investor confidence. And in the end, a downgrade of the U.S. credit rating did occur. But the reasons for that downgrade are very complex. They don't just have to do with the fact that Congress wouldn't budge on approving a debt ceiling. It had much to do with a no-confidence vote in the ability of Congress and the president to address long-term debt problems. This is something we need to remember. The president keeps comparing this to someone who runs up a big tab in a restaurant and then just ditches it, leaves it for someone else to pay. If we don't own up to the debt ceiling and approve it, we're no better than deadbeats. Well, doesn't approving the debt ceiling mean that we're passing along that big bill at the restaurant to our kids anyway? I
That's
think
a great
it does.
point. And in that point, that is exactly, John Harwood was asking about the continuing resolution and the fight over the budget. And here is what Treasury Secretary Lew said. Roll it.
Generally, the president thinks the right answer is a balanced approach. We've pressed very hard for the kinds of agreements that would do both spending reform, entitlement reform, and tax reform. We've hit a bit of an obstacle with the Congress because there hasn't been openness to doing the balance with the tax reform. The president has tried to reach out in every way that is possible to make it clear he's looking for the sensible common middle ground. That's very different from do we take something as fundamental as the full faith and credit of the United States and put it in jeopardy or raise a question. And I think if you look back at 2011, we see what the problem is when you can confuse the two. 2011 was the very first time, in certainly my years in Washington, it's 3 decades, where there was debate about whether or not to default. It used to be that the debt limit was treated as a deadline to force action to come together. In 2011, we actually saw the specter of default raised as something that was an affirmative position that some were saying was better than the alternative. That was dangerous. It was bad for the economy. We can't go back there.
Right. And he's addressing the tax increases, the trade-off for cuts in entitlement, possibly trading those things off, and what happened with sequestration. And it seems that, once again, he mentions default. And Pete, you've mentioned, and I really appreciate this, the fact that, hey, this is what Treasury secretaries do, R or D. Great point. Well taken. Presidents haven't threatened Social Security, but it is only an extension of that policy or that strategy. So well taken. Tell me, what do you make of that particular answer when it comes to the negotiation and what we're going to see?
Well, the first thing to remember is President Obama did agree in 2011 to a deal that said we would raise the debt ceiling in order to create a super committee to try and find savings that the White House and Congress could agree on in the federal budget. Well, the super committee failed in that task. So that meant that sequestration had to kick in along with additional budget caps. Here's the problem. The president wants to go back on that deal, along with some members of Congress, in both parties. The president submitted a budget earlier this year that basically ignores the very existence of sequestration in many categories of federal spending. The Senate Democratic Budget Committee also passed a blueprint that ignores sequestration. So what they're saying basically is that, well, we won't hold the debt ceiling hostage in the future, even though we agreed in the past that in order to prevent the debt ceiling from going up so fast in the future, we needed to reduce spending. We don't care about that anymore. We want to go back on our word. And then he wonders why there is so much disgust with the game playing over the debt ceiling. It's not the fact that Republicans or conservatives are demanding a little spending restraint in the future for raising the debt ceiling. It's that these folks who agreed to it in 2011 are now going back on their word.
And the idea that we've talked about before, McCain and Graham getting together on the military cuts I would say the restoration of what was cut from the military in exchange for tax increases. So as we are all taking this in, and you are brilliant, by the way, communication-wise, and I know why they don't invite you on this week, because they're scared to death of you, Pete Sepp. Bottom line, when we hear this matters to us because it is impacting the markets, our ability for our economy, certainty in the economy, and we should look out for what if you were to boil these things down and say, okay, you need to understand this and fight for this. What would it be?
Need to understand that we will not make progress on reducing the deficit and avoiding huge additional increases in the debt ceiling and avoiding future downgrades in our credit rating unless we at least start by sticking with the original deal in 2011, which imposed caps on part of the federal budget. That's all Congress needs to do with the president and say, okay, we're not negotiating with you. We're going to take you at your word. Will you keep your word and abide by the law you signed in 2011 imposing budget caps? If you stop pretending they don't exist, we'll go forward with a debt ceiling increase. I think that is at least a start to get the president on the same page.
I hope they're listening. Republicans, Democrats, I don't care. I hope they're listening to you. Pete Sepp, thank you for taking the time tonight. It's always a pleasure. Take care.
Take care.
All right. On the flip side, on the flip side, you've got more great programming right here on AFR Talk. Hey, know this. God knows you. God loves you. He created you. You're worth it. And live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. I'm Crane Durham, and for me and Brent, Jeremy, and Cedra, nothing but truth. We'll see you next time. AFR Talk.